I'm very honored to introduce Catherine and Erik Pema Kunsang. Erik and Catherine, both of them, who actually do not need any introduction, but for sake of it, Erik Pema Kunsang is a dharma teacher, co-founder of RYI and Publications, and a translator of numerous sacred years. And Erik will be interviewed by our Professor Catherine Dalton, who is also a textual translator and oral interpreter. Basically, today we will explore Erik Pema Kunsang's experience as one of the early translators of Tibetan Buddhist teaching, the role translation plays in transmission of the Buddhist teaching to the West, translation as a form of Buddhist practice, and Erik's personal advice for Buddhist translators. Now I pass on the mic to Catherine and Erik. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Lakshmi. Erik, it's such a pleasure actually to be here, wherever this is, cyberspace, with you today. I think for many of the people who are here in this group, like for me, your Dharma translation has been such a big part of our personal relationships with our teachers and with Buddhist texts for many years. I know that for myself, the very first time I heard Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche teach, you were translating. And that was also the case most of the time for many, many years after that. And also your textual translations have been part of my personal Dharma study and my personal Dharma practice from the very beginning up to and including my most recent practice session. So for me, you've also, in addition, been such an important model for my own translation work. So I'm really happy actually to have the opportunity here with Rangjung Yeshe Institute to make this space for you to share some of your experience and your advice today with our community, which I believe includes a number of translators as well as a number of aspiring translators. The first thing that I wanted to ask you about is your early experience as a Dharma translator. You're one of the earlier translators bringing Tibetan Buddhist teachings to a Western audience. And I think now the way that translators train is probably quite different than what you went through in that initial training and beginning to be a translator. Now we have all of these electronic dictionaries like the one that you made and translator training programs, for example. And I just wonder if you could share a little bit with us about your early experience as a Dharma translator, and in particular, any advice you have about how that experience and what you learned during that experience might be of particular benefit to younger translators who have different experiences learning.
Many years have gone by, and the world has changed so much. In those days, there was no internet, nobody had computers, handphones, there was no fax even, and everyone took notes. There was paper and pen. In the beginning, I even had a fountain pen, and it was a mess. And when we needed a text to work on for our own practice or for translating, we needed to copy it by hand. Think about that. No photocopy machines in those days. And my own personal practice text, all of them I copied by hand, except if they were already in print from wood blocks. So it sounds like I'm from the previous century. And as a matter of fact, I am from the former century. And therefore, it makes me really jealous at you guys who can just access the entire Tripitaka and all the tantras and commentaries like on your own hard disk so easily. So what is necessary now is not to imitate what I did and what people at that time did, because it's like it would be like moving back into the Stone Age, and that's unnecessary. Instead, it is much more important to step up and make whatever we did much better quality, and much better, much more heart in it, rather than volumes and volumes. put more emphasis on quality rather than quantity. We tried to do that in those days also. And I learned Tibetan from Tulku Urgyen in Darjeeling, and from Professor Norbo in Darjeeling also. But my main guide has been Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche, who has told the do's and don'ts of both oral translation and written translation. And with Tulku Urgyen, I was able to ask every single word, because the dictionary that was available in those days by Sarah Chandra Das, a British intelligence officer who was sent to Tibet in order to collect the words in the Tibetan language. And in his whole dictionary, there are maybe 3 Buddhist words. So it was almost useless for translating sutras, and especially sadhanas. It was hopeless. So rather than depending upon dictionaries, I would start from the beginning again. Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche, he asked me after 4 years of having studied, he said, you need to go back to the basics and begin with Abhidharma, and to get a vocabulary that is like watertight on your own terms. So in the beginning, I wrote down 1 word on a piece of paper this size, and then as the months grew, it became more and more, until finally there were in that dictionary maybe 300,000 entries. And if I had to do that today, I would think that would be an insane task to do, totally insane. But now, as the head of the Sadra Foundation, he hosted the whole thing online. So for all of you who are interested, you can access it there. The version of my dictionary that is available in various programs, that is 10 years older. So I would request all of you who are interested to join the Rangjung Yeshe dictionary project online, because you can all participate and add your own vocabularies to it, so it can continue to grow. And as a matter of fact, I would like to donate the whole thing to Rangjung Yeshe Institute, Catherine and the others. You're welcome to have all of it and use it to make even better.
Erik, that's so generous.
It's already available for free.
I know, but still.
But it would make me happy if people continue to expand it. And it's very useful. It's been, I think, last time I looked, maybe 50 million times it has been accessed. And so that's a very nice thing to have. And that's one thing. The other part of your question, what we did in those days, was to receive teachings in Tibetan. And some of the teachers, they would speak Tibetan, and those who understood Tibetan, they could receive the teaching. If you didn't, you couldn't. For example, Chadra Rinpoche, Heidi, he would not teach to anyone unless they knew Tibetan. He said, so go away, come back when you know Tibetan. And to come to Nepal for maybe a few months and then have to go back, that would be like impossible. Then you have to come back again and again. Or throw your passport away and just stay there. That was another method. These days, it's very different. Due to the kindness of Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche, then people who study at the institute, they can get visas to stay in Nepal continuously. It wasn't like that before. I had only 1 month visa at a time for maybe 20 years. 1 month at a time, it had to be renewed. And we never knew whether we could be there the next month. So in the beginning, I learned Tibetan 10 words a day, or maybe more. And then the next day, another 10. And I had my little list I had to go through, and in the chai shop, I'd look at it, learn it by heart, and then the next day. When Mingyu Rinpoche learned English, he did the same technique, 10 words a day. And then one day he asked me, do you want me to repeat them from the bottom or from the above? So rather than just memorize them, he visualized them. He learned English very fast. So the key here is tenacity. You have to persevere. Once you start Tibetan studies, you just continue. That's a key. In short, the 2 steps: begin and continue. But there's something much more important, and that is the attitude. Attitude, motivation, intent, so much more important than producing translations. Kalu Rinpoche, whom I studied with for a while in Bodh Gaya, he told me about the Sanskrit grammar that is available in Tibet. There are 2 main ones, but in India there were 18. And he said that the reason why 2 of them survived was because the scholar who wrote them had pure bodhisattva attitude. And it is that pure heart that makes other people, for whatever reason they don't understand, they just like that text to learn from. And what we have in the important books like The Words of My Perfect Teacher or others like that is because of the heart that lies behind that. That makes it so that people would love to understand what's in that book without having to be told in some kind of invisible karmic strings. So all of you who are engaged in translation work, don't focus on the output. Focus on your own attitude and improve it as often as you can.
Erik, that also actually leads into one of the other things that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, which is that, over the past years, on the occasions when I've had the opportunity to ask you for advice about Dharma translation, I think when I think back on it, I feel like most of the advice about translation that I've received from you has been more related to Dharma practice than to anything technical about the techniques of translation. And I remember you mentioned to me one time in the past that many, many, many of your translations were produced while you were in retreat. And so I just wonder if you could share with us some of your thoughts and your reflections about Dharma translation as a form of Dharma practice, and also in particular, what kind of advice you might have for translators and oral interpreters of the Dharma in relation to this.
I don't want to sound like I'm bragging or boasting here, but I think it's a very important point is that you try to be what you are translating, rather than to speak about it in third person, as if the Dharma is somebody else that you're describing from afar. Rather, first try to embody the meaning of what is in the text, and then you can just speak it. In a more practical sense, you need to know all the words before you translate, rather than you begin a sentence and then you need to look it up or ask somebody. It gets broken. First, learn the whole thing, not just once, but many times. And then when you translate, it's just like opening up for a bucket of water with a tap in the bottom, and it just comes out almost effortlessly. And that is the retreat situation is the best for that, because then you are undisturbed by talk and TV and radio. You do your practice, and then between sessions, you can just pour it out. And then later, when you're with others, then you can go through the editing and typesetting process. So I feel that retreat practice and if that's not possible, practice is more important than translation. Then translation becomes an expression of your practice, rather than you practice in the morning and then you have no time for practice because you have to translate. It becomes two different things. That's the wrong approach. And if I should go into more detail, when you translate the Vinaya, you have to be someone who has taken the Vinaya vows. Very important. No other people should meddle with the Vinaya than monks or nuns, with some exceptions, Urgyen Rinpoche, for example. But some teachings on Vinaya are only given to monks and nuns, not to lay people. When you translate the Bodhisattva Pitaka, it's important that you are also trying to be a Bodhisattva, not that you are describing the Bodhisattva world seen through a telescope. It doesn't work that way. It becomes embedded in the translation that you are one step removed and you're just describing the zebras and the elephants and you have never been to Africa. It doesn't work. But especially with Vajrayana, it is so important that the translator is a Vajrayana practitioner. Otherwise, something else sneaks into the text. For example, all of the conventional Buddhist teachings, Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana, the gateway there is the view of the Hinayana, which is that the sense of ego, me, myself is unfindable. If there is no taste of that, the word I sneaks in every single sentence. Isn't that true? And Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche has several times said to him, why do you add the word I, you, and he, and it, and all the time? Just say what it says. But then I try to object and say, we don't think like that in the West. He say, yeah, that's true. We need to have the culture of at least the Hinayana view. And without that, there's no Mahayana, forget it. And absolutely no Vajrayana. The Hinayana view of the absence of personal identity is, you can say, the common denominator for the whole of the Tripitaka. Otherwise, who is the translator? It's impossible not to get dragged into the swamp of attachment to fame and material gain. Without that, at least there's some chance that one can check oneself, or this mind can check itself, and stop and dissolve the attachment and the belief in ego. But if there's not even the experience of it, then the translator gets lost, especially in the universities. As you know, academia is a jungle of backstabbing and power trips. Very often I hear that. So you need to take a responsibility for that and loosen it up and say, real Buddhist teaching is based on the view. Not trying to brag or boast at anything. I haven't realized it, but I'm glimpsing it a little bit once in a while. Then after that, then it becomes possible to make translations. And how should they read? How should the reader get a feel for the fight? Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche, he once said that some translations at that time, that's maybe 25 years ago, they read like drinking sand. Did you get that? It's like drinking sand. Sand.
Seems like something to avoid.
Yeah.
Well, how would you suggest that a translator work towards avoiding that particular pitfall of forcing his or her readers to drink sand?
Take it easy. Don't publish anything for the first 10 years. I would suggest that. Just learn the skill really well. And then there is no rush. It's not like in the university where you have to publish your PhD immediately. Otherwise, you don't get your degree. The purpose here is to help people. It's not to raise up oneself. That has never been the purpose. So what helps people the most? In one word, kindness. You can get the almost the smell of kindness from a book if the translator, and there are many like that now, when you open it, you can feel that there's devotion, respect, and especially kindness for what? For the reader. And it's exactly the same in all India. The first thing a Pandita would reflect on is, who is the audience? Not just what do I understand and how do I make this fit and then out and then slap it together and publish it. No, first, who will understand this? What kind of level are they at? What kind of language can they understand? And along with that, don't clutter the syntax with brackets, parentheses, footnotes, words added in Tibetan or Sanskrit, just for clarity. It makes for obscurity instead. Clean, beautiful prose should be like that. Clean, beautiful prose, not interpolated with all different ideas of one's own. But when it comes to poetry, it seems like many of my previous translations, and there is no difference between poetry and prose, or besides they're just hacked up into short, smaller pieces and waste more paper when it's printed. But otherwise, poetry is often not poetry. Some exceptions. And you need to do something about that. Lift the bar, make it better than in the past. Poetry should read like poetry, so that it is inspiring, it opens one's mind, and people can say, wow, you can say so short and so beautiful. Like really well-made food. You come back for more. But most important, motivation and kindness. And then as minimum for a translator, at least get the view of Hinayana into your system. Minimum. It's the absence of personal identity. Not as a realization, that's too much to ask, but at least as an experience that you can return back to as often as possible. There's nothing worse than an ego tripper translator. You shake the book and the ego trips makes a mess over the whole thing. I don't need to mention anyone we probably know, but it's so important. The Buddha's teaching should be something very, very beautiful and respectable. So that kind of appreciation is so important, not to want to make a mess out of it. And I'm probably one of the worst, but I did wait 10 years before publishing anything. Doesn't mean it was perfect at that time, but at least I waited and got to remove a lot of mistakes. Because once a book is printed, can't pull it back. One of my good friends, Daniel Gorman, when he was still in university, he published one of the first books in America on meditation. He regretted it the rest of his life because he couldn't take it back. The publisher wouldn't allow him to make a new edition. He said, if I had just waited until I knew more. But sometimes people are so busy. They're such a rush. They want to get out there and even worse, the name on the front cover and get known. And it's just BS. It's not what is needed in this context. Then better write a novel. People will always read it and throw it away anyway. But Buddhist books, but one thinks it's a Buddhist book, so I wouldn't put it on the shrine. Oh my God. It's better to take it very easy, take it very slow. I understand that some translation groups, they have timelines and even worse, not lifelines, but deadlines. The things have to be finished at a certain time or else. It's horrible. It should be finished when it's finished, not because it's the 1st of March. What do you think?
I think that sounds relieving. Yeah, no, it's definitely, I think with translation, it really does take its own time. So it's nice not to have to push. Erik, one thing that you mentioned about with translating poetry, you said we should translate poetry as poetry, and that's something that we should really try to work on and raise the bar. I know that in recent years, you in particular have been interested in translating and have been doing translations of sadhana in a way that can be sung or chanted. My experience with attempting this and talking to other people is often it's just a technical feat that many translators just can't manage to do. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process of translating verse into chantable verse, and any advice that you would have for those of us who might want to attempt that.
Yes. You have to find this song in your heart. And then once you have that song or that tune, then when you translate, you make it fit that tune. My wife has helped me a lot with that. Before meeting her, I didn't have any song in my heart. Sorry to say. But it comes sometime and sometimes not. So it's not that you can say from 8 to 4 every day, I'll have a song in my heart and translate like that. Doesn't work. It's just like art. You cannot just make music or painting and so on when you don't feel like it. So that's up to the individual person. Some can, some cannot. So rather than produce a lot of pages, please, future translators, produce less pages with better quality. And on a more practical sense, the Tibetan meter is either 7 or 9 phonemes in one sentence, right? I found that it works fine with the 13 English phonemes in a sentence. I can give you an example. My wife and I, we chant only in English and mostly in rhythm and meter. And it's a big pleasure. I love doing the practice that way because it's so much easier to remember. When just like songs you learned when you were a kid, you know them still, because they had a rhythm and sometimes rhyme also, but at least the same meter. Here's an example of, I just took out one. Root Guru, glorious and precious Master, sit upon the lotus throne above our heads. With your kindness beyond limits, please accept us. Give the cities of your body, speech, and mind. Very easy to remember. It's used in all traditions. And you want another example?
Please, that was really beautiful.
Better come with a good one. Oh yeah, the refuge and Bodhisattva vow. Namo, I and every sentient being equal to the sky. Take a source of refuge, all protection most sublime. Forming Bodhi, mind resolve, aspiring and applied. We shall realize the triple Kaya Guru state. Pungri, and so on. I won't bother you with that. But it is possible. And you just have to put your mind into that attitude that today I'll try and make something very beautiful that at least one person in this mind would like to chant again and again. So that you and those who are closest to you, you test it out. Not just once, but a couple of 100 times, until you find that both the meaning and the words are all included. So that it's not only the word translation, but also the meaning translation, and at best, both at the same time. Great meditators, there's a certain time in their life when, as Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche say, the knot on the nadis in the throat becomes untied, and that makes it so that the understanding or realization can be poured into a beautiful poetry, like spontaneously, like Nyosho Ken Rinpoche, many others. They didn't have to think much. Once I asked him to sing a spontaneous song, and he sang a long one, and I said, "Where was it from?" He said, "Not from anywhere, I just made it up right now." So he was like that. And it would be wonderful if more translators could be like that, wouldn't it? So find the tune. I suggest using 13 syllables in a sentence. Then the English words are longer than the Tibetan, but they can fit there. And forget too many extra grammatical particles in English, the and stuff like that. You can easily dispense with them, as long as it's really understandable and evocative. And then, of course, always begin translation work with refuge and Bodhisattva vow, but not just blabbering the words, but really making the strong wish that what I do here, may this mind truly understand it. And once it's understood here, may it be expressed and reach the minds of others all over the planet and elsewhere too, if possible. Because when you have that attitude, then it's like the work doesn't belong to you any longer. It's already given away from the beginning. And you don't get so stuck in it in that way. The worst thing one can do is to translate for just one or two people in writing, because if they get angry at you, then the whole thing is lost. Especially if it's your professor in your university, because they have to judge you. Otherwise, you don't get your MA, BA, or PhD. So rather than that, may it be appreciated and may it really soften the minds of thousands of people I don't know or I will never meet. Maybe for those people. It's much more open-ended attitude is worth gold. Because then you never get disappointed or your feelings hurt. Another thing is whether your work will be of value in while you're still alive or after you're dead doesn't matter. Really doesn't matter. All right? Many of the Tibetan masters like Tsile Nasarandul, his works were not available while he was alive, only collected later. And especially the number of people who read his books is like right now, much more than in Tibet. And he's been dead for 400 or 500 years. Did he mind? Not at all. He didn't publish his own books. He wrote while he was in retreat and handed it out through a small window where he got food in through, and wrote only in reply to somebody asking. And then afterwards, he didn't have a copy. He didn't have a vanity shelf of my works like that. I had that. Anything else?
Yes. You mentioned about when we work as translators, it's important to try and think, may this work be of benefit to as many people as possible? You know, may it help them, may it change and open their minds, whether I know them or not, whether it's now or in the future. And this kind of brought to mind this question of how I wonder how you see the way in which translation or translating Dharma teachings, how that's related to this process of actually the transmission of the Buddha Dharma to the West and actually all over the world. That's something that you've been watching for decades now and been part of for decades now. And so I just wonder what are your thoughts about the relationship of translation of the Dharma teachings, both textually and orally, to the transmission of the Dharma, and also actually if your experience as a Dharma translator, how that may have informed your experience as a Dharma teacher.
Oh, it's totally interconnected. I don't see any difference between translating for people and giving teachings, because I don't try to make up anything of my own. In the beginning, when Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche asked me to teach, I often would look up to my above my right shoulder to see if he's still sitting there, just out of habit. So I would have the feeling that he's still watching or paying attention to whether I make mistakes or not. So that kind of discipline is very important. But without having looked at people's faces to see whether they understand or not, you don't really have a meter as to whether you make sense or not. So I would suggest that as often as possible, and whether you get a salary or not doesn't matter, do oral translations, offer your service, make yourself available, even for translating for a Tibetan doctor or anything. It's so valuable to have the routine of making sense. So another person, if you translate for a doctor, it's often a matter of life and death. So it's very important to get the meaning right. And you never get paid because the person is lying there sick and moaning. So also it really doesn't matter. It's not, that's not what gives the true joy. it is to be of assistance. That's where real satisfaction comes from. And for years, I've been doing that, looking at people, and then you can see whether they look like question marks or whether they look like exclamation marks. It's immediately visible. And when you use words that are ununderstandable, then you do it once and then you find some other word. Because why be such pedantic? One word in Tibetan has this word in English and no other word. That is to be too rigid. And that kind of work becomes like a dinosaur, it dies out. You don't even have to burn it, it just disappears, people throw them away. But then there are some books you see on people's bookshelves, they're still there after 30, 40, 50 years, because they were made with pure heart and they continue to give benefit, whether they're translation or written lectures, or doesn't matter, they can still bring benefit for maybe hundreds of years. What are we talking about?
We were talking about the transmission of the Dharma to the West and the role of translation in relation to that.
Whether it's translation or whether it's a Dharma mind speaking to other minds, and honesty and sincerity is the most important. You share what you understand. Simple as that. With good intention, with kindness. Animals like kind people. And people like kind people. Isn't that true? Kindness is so important. With the balance, with the view, of course. And it's sometimes when you translate for people who are not Buddhists, which is often most of the time, unless it's at an Dharma center or like at Rangjung Yeshe Institute, then you need to make sure that it's understandable. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice to the Dharma, scaring away people because they can't understand. It sounds like very interesting, but not for me. And that doesn't mean we should water it down completely, but it's possible to find a word in English that has one syllable and is generally known rather than a technical Greek or Latin word with 5 syllables. And those words are impossible to put into poetry, almost impossible. And sometimes very hard to pronounce also. Like, well, you know. Oh yeah, I could tell you a little bit about a program that I'm hosting in Denmark with some friends. And that is placing emphasis on the 2 vehicles that come before Hinayana. The vehicle for humans, which mean to be humane, decent person. And just like the Dalai Lama teaches, taking responsibility for one's life and for others' lives. And then the vehicle for God's. God's here means your divine something here. And then how to access that in nowness. And the words I use for those 2 vehicles, everybody can understand. And then I noticed that everybody becomes automatically Buddhist through that. It's like hewing and sanding a piece of wood, and then you can use it immediately for building, rather than starting with Mahayana or Vajrayana and having the feeling that this belongs to some other realm, somebody else, the Bodhisattvas, or for deities, the Buddhas, and like that. So the vehicle for humans, I find, is so beautiful. The Songtsen Gampo established that in the 8th or 9th century in Tibet. The Meche Tsangma Chutuk, the 16 spiritual principles. And I've rephrased them just a little bit to make it more understandable, but it basically means be a nice person as often as you can. And that is so important, because who wants to be in a Dharma center where people are not nice and struggle for power and use each other in different ways, or look at newcomers as cows to be milked, and all of that samsaric stuff? We need to clean it up before the Buddha Dharma is introduced. People are leaving now, I can see.
No, they aren't.
Just joking. And then we go to Hinayana. So I found that the 4 pillars of the Buddha Dharma and the 4 reliances, they fit so well within that. So rather than having a room of people who sit like this, then having a room of people who sit like this, yeah, that's me, I can be like that. I want to be like that. That is important for establishing the Dharma in our parts of the world.
Erik, you talked a little bit about the way that Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche had given you some instruction as you were training in translation. I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about how, about Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche's role in perhaps shaping you as a translator.
Yeah, he would speak for very long time, sometimes half an hour or 45 minutes, and was not interested in being interrupted. And Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche is very much like that also. I know that you have developed the same ability of listening undistractedly. And so you understand what I'm talking about. The secret there is simply to listen undistractedly. Tulku Urgyen, once he broke in while I was listening, and he said, "Kuntak machi," just two words. Don't make a lot of ideas. And I just froze there because while he was talking, I was trying to formulate how to say it in English, and forget that. And also, I couldn't take notes because I couldn't read them afterwards. So I found out the best way was to simply settle deeply and completely, just settle with a listening attitude. And then afterward, it was like just playing it off from a tape recorder. I didn't have to think even. It would just come out like that. That is a skill that we can all train in. It's very important to be able to listen as an innocent child, like completely absorbed in hearing what is being said. Not being too clever or figuring it out or making ideas like that, but listening completely like an innocent child. That's for oral translation. And then for written translation, read it many, many times first, at least 10 times, so that it becomes absorbed into your system, not just mouthing it off like some Mönlams that people in the monasteries, they know, they can yap off a whole volume without even paying attention to what's being said. Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche said that they've developed this special skill of repeating long prayers and thinking about something totally different. And he felt sad about that. So he said, we're going to change that. Prayers or Mönlam, I translate them in English as decision wishes, because you're declaring something. And that cannot be unconscious, like just making sounds, because generally you're not declaring or deciding something. But it has to arise from your awake heart, like a conscious heart, that you really mean what you're saying. And try to do that with something you're about to translate. Read it loud, and many times, like at least 10 times. And then find out the few words that you don't know by now from somebody who is a competent in that, not just anyone. And once you're clear about the whole thing, then translate it, and you'll feel it's a huge pleasure to express what you already know. That is so important for written translations. Especially if it's something obscure, like a biography, you need to really immerse yourself in it. Like immersion is very important, so that what you translate and you are not two different things anymore. It's like the water you swim in. That's important. So the less familiar you are with it, the more work it's necessary to become familiar. And I know that many of you are involved in the huge project of the translating the 84,000 segments of the Dharma, the Tripitaka. And that requires a lot of immersion. And reading a lot of sutras, and not only those you're about to translate, but reading the other ones too, and the other people's translations. And if you have the time, read the whole Tripitaka more than once. Read the White Lotus commentary on the Buddha Shakyamuni sadhana many times, Catherine. So you become really, it becomes your environment, the place you live. And it's beautiful that way, very beautiful. Becomes easier and easier in these days. And so therefore, raise the bar so that it's just as difficult as when I was young, but at a different level. Take up the difficulty. Make clean translations. And if they're necessary to have notes, write them woven into an introduction or in the back, even in the back, even better. Tibetan books don't have introductions so much.
Erik, you've talked a little bit about some advice for doing textual translation and other advice for oral interpreters. And I wonder if, you know, since you work fully in both of those worlds, I wonder if you see your role as a translator as being exactly the same in both of those contexts, or if you see some difference in some particular way, and if so, what kind of difference you see in your role in those different types of translation?
There are as many differences as there are types of literature. Tibetan medicine has a completely different style. Astronomy, the moving of the heavenly elements, completely different style. Grammar, books, it requires a different type of person than me, 100% sure. But some people, they really love that. So we should leave it for those people. And books that have use of the need for a lot of footnotes, they probably require what you call accompanying volume, rather than interweaving like I did with the Light of Wisdom. I regret that, because it makes a mess of the book. It should have been in a separate volume. And Abhidharma has its own style. The sutras have their own style. So try to do it just like the Tibetans did when they translated from Sanskrit. Translate the names of people and places into your own language. So then you get rid of all these Sanskrit diacritics that normal people can't read. You hear me? Normal people can't read it. Try and write Krishna in the proper way with Sanskrit diacritics. It's unreadable. Like the deer that Avalokiteshvara has over his shoulder is called Krishna Sara. Why not call it the black spotted deer? That's understandable immediately. But that all falls under be kind. Kind sometimes is more important than precise. Later, precise is very important. But in the beginning, especially when people open their first book to the Dharma, and then they look and they see this is unreadable, put it away. That would be a disservice to sentient beings and to the Dharma. Especially important in these days when translating sutra and tantric material. We need to be very careful for that clarity and kindness should go together. That's easy enough for me to say. I made a mess out of most of the books I published. So now I can act like I didn't do any of them, and then telling you what you should do and not do. But just try to make it better than what I did. But especially don't publish anything with parentheses inside the text, unless the Tibetan work has parentheses. Don't use too many quotation marks. Don't use bold italics too much, and definitely no footnotes. Just like Times and Newsweek, they never do stuff like that. Just clean text, uncluttered. I would for sure be thrown out of any university, but I'm not worried these days. I'm old.
Erik, I wanted to ask, you have translated quite beautifully, I believe, I feel, for many, many years into English, which is not your native language, which is amazing. And on the one hand, it seems like an incredible feat, actually. And then, I've talked with a number of Dharma friends and translation students about this, people who are not native English speakers. And often people tell me that for them, it's actually more difficult to speak about Dharma or translate Dharma into their native languages because their primary exposure to Dharma has been either in Tibetan or in English. And so then making that jump into their native language is more difficult. But I understand that these days you are quite delighted to translate into Danish. And I just wonder if you have any advice for translators into languages besides English about that process of opening up into translating into their native languages and developing vocabulary. And I think it's something that's really important going forward. And I wonder, I guess you probably would be an excellent person to give advice about that.
Yeah, don't get stuck on the initial awkwardness. Just carry on, just like learning to drive a bike. It's only a beginner problem. And as a matter of fact, the learning in a different language than your own just means you have less barriers. Also with awkward words, you don't feel they're awkward because you don't know them. But they could be just as awkward. Like, I don't want to give examples. The most important is that don't have too much kontok. Don't have too many ideas. Just focus on kindness and being in a state of equanimity, and especially don't listen too much to what other people who just love to criticize for the sake of criticizing. Like we learn in the school here in the West to have a critical attitude, which is very important because we escape a lot of bullshit. But we shouldn't get stuck in that. We translate with open mind and kindness. That's the most important. And not too many fancy words. Other people can do those. Those who are brought up in that and can't say a sentence without it. And I actually want to say that when the Vajrayana came to the West, to Europe and America, it was mainly through scholars, and especially university-educated people who are in the habit of using university-level words. So that's why very few Vajrayana philosophy is expressed in a short, concise language. And can do better than that in the future. If you look at the root of the words in Tibetan, they're very short. So why invent 5, 6, 7, 10 or more syllables to say that one word, that one syllable? Like Herbert Günther, when he translated the Changchup, which is Tibetan for Bodhi, into English, it was limpid clearness and consummate perspicacity for 2 sounds. That's not necessary anymore. That was to reach out to the people who were very fond of German philosophy. And I think that's already happened. So no need to copy that. Find the root of the words and express it in very simple language. That's good enough. But attitude is the most important. Rather than having a narrow attitude, which is, this is for me, well, I need to make money, I need to be loved. It's a very narrow attitude and very limited also. And much better to have a vast, unlimited attitude, unlimited kindness, and unlimited heart and mind, wouldn't you rather have one big diamond than 1,000 big pieces of glass? What would you prefer?
I'll go for the diamond.
Exactly. So focus on presenting even 4 lines that are beautiful, moving, evocative, and really hits the reader's heart. Wouldn't that be much better than 1,000 pages of gibberish? That's what Tulku Urgyen said. If you can explain or translate just 4 sentences so they can be understood and really affect other people's lives, that is worth more than filling up the entire universe with gold and jewels and make offerings to all the Buddhas of the 10 directions. That's one of the guiding principles. And I treasure that. I don't wear jewelry, but that kind of jewel I keep. Chökyi Rinpoche, he said, translate all the short sadhanas in the Choling Tassa. I haven't been able to do that, but I think it should be done. But I have the feeling Pacha Rinpoche is taking care of that. Isn't that true? I've also given everything I had in the past to that, I've given to that group. Rangjung Yeshe Institute was not interested. I had the feeling they're studying texts with fancy names, right?
Yeah, Pacha Rinpoche's group is keeping quite busy actually with translating practice texts, which is wonderful.
Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche has a much long-term vision. What would be good not only for 10, 20, but for 100 years? He thinks like that. So his plans are very solid. When he make people spend time studying Abhidharma for a year and Prajnaparamita and like that, it will have an impact for many, many generations. As we see when there was a need for translators for translating the Tipitaka, he had already educated a nestful and more to come. Isn't that true? What's your name?
Yes, yeah. He has created quite a nest of translators.
Yeah, and spilling out like an anthill.
Yeah, it's quite a feat, actually.
And starting other places as well, like in California, right?
Those places.
And we plan to have a group in Denmark also at some point.
That's wonderful. We will have the best possible guidance. So that seems like an excellent place for it.
Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche was our main guide for Rangjung Yeshe Institute and its satellites. He always used the word scholar practitioners. It means practitioners who are also learned. But if not learned, at least practitioners. Not just scholars.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think he has a feeling that information gathering will not get us through the barrow. It's not true, but sincerity will.
Erik, I think we have, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Have you covered the most?
Well, I was just going to say, it seems like we have just a little bit of time left, and I wanted to, if possible, open the floor up for questions from some other folks, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
So if people want to ask a question, I think maybe probably the most effective way would be just to type it into the chat, and then I will maybe just deliver them auditorily to the group and to Erik. Right, Erik, I have already a list of questions waiting.
Yes.
We don't have a whole lot of time, but maybe I'll at least put together a few of them. There's two that were related that I'm going to try and put together into one, which is one person is wondering if you could give some advice to translators who are translating from English into other languages, but without knowing Tibetan. And someone else is asking whether you think it is necessary for those kind of translators to know some basic Tibetan in order to translate the Dharma from English into, for example, Portuguese, or is that not necessary?
The more important is to be familiar with the subject matter, so that you don't have to guess. Are we talking about Amitabha being red or blue, for example? You have to already know these things, so that most common mistakes don't come in. Be familiar with the topic, and then it's less important. If you know basic Dharma vocabulary, it's fine. But you don't have to know all the Tibetan words. Not necessary, but more important, be familiar with the topic. In the dictionary I mentioned earlier, Chandradas, the word sangtal was translated as copper dust.
Yeah.
Where the real meaning is the transparent quality of mind. So he was not familiar with the topic.
No. Yeah. Well, also related to that, one person is asking that they said, I understand that the meaning of words may depend on the tradition or the school or the yana. And so what are the implications of that for translators? So how do we have to fully immerse ourselves in the particular context of the tradition or the aspect of that tradition that we're translating, or how should we approach that?
100%. You need to be familiar with the topic, and especially in the inner Vajrayana, there are many words are used in different contexts with same word but with completely different meaning, like Yeshe or Sherab or Rigpa. They mean something totally different in different contexts.
Another question is, when does the translator really have the feeling, or how does the translator know that the translation work is done and that it's time to put it out there into the world? It's ready to go out.
It's very simple. It's never done and never ready. But as good as it gets, as the best we can do is that's the best. That's the best we can do. But don't think it's perfect just because you spend a lot of time on it.
And in terms of texts, Erik, what are the most important texts for us to work on translating at this point?
Whichever text your guru suggests or commands, that's the most important.
Excellent answer. One person says, I'm always afraid when translating from English to French. Oh, things are moving on my screen. It feels like when we used to copy musical cassettes, and that there's some kind of loss of quality after multiple generations of copying. And so this, he says, I worked a little bit on the triple excellence, and I always have the fear of missing something important and that I might mislead someone. And so I'm always checking it 10 times, but I still have that kind of concern.
It's very good. Just keep that little fear. It's good.
Another question.
Don't be too self-confident in the beginning. Maybe after 50 years, you can leave that fear because you're close to death. But keep a little fear. It's okay.
Erik, there's a question about how long you studied Tibetan or have studied Tibetan.
I began when I was 19, and now I'm 66, and I'm not perfect in Tibetan.
That's a tall order for all of us who are still continuing to learn.
People who learn these days can learn Tibetan much more easy than me.
Another person is asking, actually, how should I start? And is it necessary to get a degree in Buddhist studies, or studying Buddhism, or not necessary?
Well, since this is a forum for Rangjung Yeshe Institute where you get degrees, so I can teach you a little bit. I learned Tibetan without going to Rangjung Yeshe Institute. There was no institute that time. But I can tell you a little anecdote about how it started and where the Rangjung Yeshe word, the name came from. That was during Tulku Urgyen's one and only trip to United States. And we had been through Colorado and arrived in California for the fourth time, went many places. And there was the discussion. Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche said, we can also have a gathering of people once a year so they know when to come to Nepal in order to receive teachings with a translator available. Before that, there wasn't something like that. So he said, let's ask my father for an auspicious name. And then we went into the room where Tulku Urgyen just sat there doing nothing. And we asked him, and then he gave, the first name he gave was Rangjung Yeshe. And then he gave about 12 others for other projects in the future. I still have that paper. But Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche, he took the first one, that's the best, he said, because it's the key to all the inner tantras. It's the key to Mahayoga, Anayoga, Hatha Yoga. There is no inner tantras without going through the gateway of Rangjung Yeshe in the meaning of the word. And that's very important. If somebody at some point study the Kapke, there are actually 9 deities, but in Mipam Rinpoche, he says in order to understand the Kapke, you have to go through the center, and the entrance door to that is Rangjung Yeshe, the nature of mind that is available in anyone, in the center of our heart. And then when it began in 1981, there were, I think, 27 participants. The first yearly seminar, and 10 days Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche taught in the monastery in Bodhanat. And then Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche gave the hearing lineage of the Great Perfection for 3 days, where people got questions and had to go and practice and then come back. And many years later, Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche wanted to institute a way where people could do more detailed studies of the sutras and tantras. And the opening ceremony was very small. There may be 20 people present. And he invited his brother, Choling Rinpoche, to come down. But since there was only arranged a throne for one teacher, they sat together on the same throne. And Chökyi Nyima was holding around Choling Rinpoche, who didn't say much. Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche gave a spontaneous lecture on why to study the Dharma and how. And then he said, and then I'll ask my brother Choling Rinpoche to also give a few remarks. And then Choling Rinpoche said, it's exactly like Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche said. He gave back the microphone. So that was the opening day, and I was there. But other than that, I haven't studied much in Rangjung Yeshe Institute. I studied in other monasteries before that, with different Khenpos. mainly Tulku Rinpoche and Khenpo Nuden and the 3 or 4 others. But that it has been centralized, so you can study all in one place. That's a great gift for people who come to Nepal. And Chökyi Nyima Rinpoche also said that rather than spending 3 months in Nepal and just being a dharma bum, drinking chai and eating momos, now they can come back and having learned something. So, what did you actually ask?
Oh, now I've forgotten because I was reading. Someone was asking about whether it's necessary to get a degree. And
No,
then, yeah.
But at the same time, for some people, yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a yes or no answer. For some people, it's very important.
Erik, thank you so much. That's been, this has just been such a joy and a pleasure, you know, for me personally, actually having the opportunity to learn more from you. And I'm so happy that the current situation in our world, at least, has made it such that things are all happening online. So many people all over the world have been able to have this opportunity to receive this advice and wisdom and guidance from you. So thank you so much. I'm really very, very grateful. And I hope to see you. I hope I can see you in person sometime soon. I think the last time was here in California, but hopefully, yes, sometime soon.
Same to you.
Yeah, please take very good care and stay in good health and live a very long life and continue these amazing Dharma activities for the benefit of many beings.
Same to all of you. I'd like to close with another piece of poetry that you probably know well, many of you. Sight, sounds, knowing, Deva, Mantra, Dhamma, Kaya, realm, play of Kayas and the wisdoms boundlessly unfold. In this practice of great yoga, secret and profound, may everyone be just one taste into a sphere of mind. In every single lifetime, may we never be apart from authentic teachers, Dharma splendor to enjoy, completing all the virtues of the Bhumis and the path. May we swiftly all attain the Vajradhara state. May the precious and sublime awakened mind arise in those has not arisen, where it has arisen, may it never wane, but continue to increase forevermore. Thank you so much. And please just carry on. Thank you so much. What you're doing will bring vast benefit, immeasurable benefit. Whether you translate from Tibetan or from another language, doesn't matter. The main thing is, does it make sense? Can it open the heart and mind of another person? Then it's worth it. And we can do this for many lifetimes. Songtse Khyentse, he said to me maybe 25 years ago, what do you think about translating the whole Tripitaka? So I said, oh, that's impossible. I will die before that. And then he said, you can just continue in your next life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erik.
Can you see hvem der ellers er på? You can unmute everybody. Can you unmute everybody?
Yes. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you, Erik.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Erik.
Thank you so much.
Dhanyawad, Erik.
Thank you.